Hi, the purpose of this video is to go over the last two grammar functions. One of my main hopes in looking at these last two functions is that you can now see the book as a resource, especially if you're going to go on to have a leadership role in CLDE in working with emerging bilingual students. Part of that leadership role will be to design curriculum and set language goals, and this book is an invaluable resource. I hope that by now you're starting to feel comfortable with this book, and as you look at the chapter on articles, chapter 15, and the chapter on relative clauses, you can see how you can look at something that your learners need some help with and use the book as a resource for great suggestions for teaching methods, and notes on how and why a particular structure is used. So at the beginning of the course, you may have been able to say, that doesn't quite sound right, but I don't know why. At the end of this course, you have this resource and this ability to say, it looks like my students need to know the difference between mass nouns and count nouns and be able to attach the right article to those. So the chapter on chapter 15 is one of those chapters that you can just kind of look through as a resource. There are parts of it that are like all the chapters that aren't that relevant to you about the intricacies of use, and you can skim those parts. But on this chapter on articles, I want you to look most closely at the information about the types of nouns, because we didn't really talk about the types of nouns, mass nouns and count nouns and proper nouns and regular nouns. So I want you to look carefully at that when you look at this articles chapter. In addition to really getting a feel for the main articles, the definite article, the indefinite article, and the zero article. And as you read this, I hope you appreciate just how much grammar information you know. When you talk about, when you say a sentence like, I've only ever been to the United States and Canada, you don't even have to think that you used the definite article before the United States, and you didn't use an article at all before Canada. And you might not even realize why. So this chapter once again gives you an appreciation for just how much grammar you know and just how much grammar there is to teach. The chapter on relative clauses is particularly tough. I mean, it's one of the more complicated parts of English grammar. And we skipped over a few chapters before that. So I want to try to go over a couple key features before you take a look at that chapter. And a big kudos to those who use that chapter to look at the relative clauses their students use in your PBA. So when we think about clauses, we're thinking about parts of a sentence that can function independently. They have all the features of a sentence: a subject, a predicate, and part of that subject a noun phrase, and part of that predicate a verb phrase, and auxiliary. So those are clauses. Phrases do not have all those features. Let's look at a couple clauses in a very simple way, and we can see how they might be put together. Let's look at a sentence like, Eduardo went to the pool. I went to the pool. Now, in most languages, definitely in English, you would never find someone really saying, Eduardo went to the pool. I went to the pool. I went swimming. It sounds short, choppy. It doesn't sound fluent. Instead, we might combine these two ideas into one. Most learners would do this just intuitively. So instead of Eduardo went to the pool, I went to the pool, we would take those two subjects, Eduardo and I, and put them into one. So that's just simple, taking one noun phrase that starts in the subject, combining two noun phrases to form a noun phrase that all functions together. Eduardo and I went to the pool. That's pretty simple. We still have a sentence with a compound subject. Now we can also take two sentences and put them together in a very simple way, two independent clauses. Instead of saying, I went swimming, and Eduardo just sat by the pool, oops, I accidentally combined them. And I could combine them with a simple coordinating conjunction. I went swimming, and maybe the word but or and, but Eduardo just sat by the pool. Again, there's a clause working independently. Here's another clause working independently. This is a compound sentence. We've taken two sentences, we've put them together with a nice coordinating conjunction, and, but, or, and put them together. Not too hard, we sort of skipped over that chapter on that use. Let's take a look at this final couple of sentences. He finally jumped in, I was drowning. Now, spoken in dialogue with these short, choppy sentences, it doesn't seem to have the right sound or the right flow. And we need to help our learners with one of the more complex aspects of English. He finally jumped in. Let's say we put the word because. Now, these two clauses are working together in a different way. He finally jumped in. Let's change this period to a comma. Because I was drowning. This clause here, because I was drowning, leaves you hanging. It's a subordinate clause, and it's not working necessarily independently because I've got this subordinating conjunction, because. It tells the listener that this clause, I was drowning, relates to this clause, and it says how. He finally jumped in, and it sort of acts like an adverbial here. Why did he jump in? Because I was drowning. This chapter deals with an even more complex kind of combining of clauses. In the last two combinings, we looked at clauses that were just kind of stuck one on top of one after another, and they were coordinated with various conjunctions. Relative clauses do not function like that. They function a little bit like a subordinating clause, but they are going to be embedded in the sentence. So let's look at these two simple sentences. The dog was very friendly. We found the dog. Those don't seem to really flow, and you would be hard-pressed to find this kind of back-to-back sentences. It works, they're all grammatical, but it just doesn't seem to flow correctly. So what dog are we talking about that was very friendly? Well, we're talking about the dog that we found. We found the dog. The dog was very friendly. Most English speakers would kind of naturally just put a relative clause into this sentence or into this sentence and combine the two, but they're going to be embedded. So the dog that we found was very friendly. And we don't have to repeat the word the dog. So I'm going to cross out the dog. But I need something here. I need a relativizer. I need to take this dog and use a word in its place to show the listener that we're still talking about the dog. And that relativizer, that relative pronoun, could be who. Well, we don't use that for non-humans. That, which, whose. These relativizers, or these relative pronouns, will be inserted so that we can take this clause and stick it into this one. The dog that we found was very friendly. That's a relative clause. We do it all the time. There's a fantastic exercise at the end of chapter 29, which kind of gives you more information on relative clauses, that shows a science text that's just filled with really complex relative clauses. And it gets back to the idea from that Schleppegrell article of really helping students identify who the actors in sentences are. It's really hard with these relative clauses. It doesn't have to be in a high school science class. It could be looking at Curious George and a sentence that says, George gave the balloons to the boy who was standing in line. And that who is standing in line acts on the boy, gives you more information. It's a relative clause. And these relative clauses can be particularly tricky for your emerging bilinguals. So relative clauses, they have an adjectival function. They function like adjectives. They tell you more information about a noun. They modify a noun phrase. They can all start with a relative pronoun. And if you read on in the chapter, you'll see sometimes we delete the relative pronoun, but that and who and which and possessive like whose, a little bit more formal, whom, when you're using an object. These words, they relativize a noun phrase. And the relative clauses are all embedded in the sentence to give you information about that noun phrase. Again, I hope you'll continue to use this book as a resource as you look at your learner's work and do some analysis for PBA. Have a great week.